Imagine living in a time when oppression was brutal, hope seemed distant, and the faith of the people was shaken. For 20 years, Israel suffered under the relentless rule of Jabin, king of Canaan, and his dreaded commander Sisera. Iron carriages tear the fields, and the courage of the Israelites seemed reduced to ashes. But when everything seemed lost, an unlikely woman emerged to change the story. Déborah was not a warrior with sword in hand, not a king with a powerful army. He was a prophetess, a judge, a woman of unshakable faith. Sitting under her palm tree, she not only judged the people, but guided Israel with wisdom and courage. And when God spoke, she didn't hesitate. But could an army led by a woman really defeat the greatest enemy of the time? What happened on Mount Tabor was more than a battle. It was a divine intervention that redefined the fate of a nation. And Deborah's story proves that no matter who you are, when God calls you, He enables you. Now get ready for an epic journey full of faith, strategy, and surprising twists. At the end of this story, you will understand that courage and obedience can change the course of the story. At a time when judges were military and spiritual leaders, Déborah stood out in a unique way. While many believed that only men could lead, God chose a woman to guide Israel. As a prophetess and judge, she not only solved disputes, but also conveyed the divine will to the people. His name has become synonymous with wisdom and courage, proving that God's call is not limited to gender or social position. Déborah was not just a spiritual figure, she was an active leader in the middle of a nation in crisis. His court, located under a palm tree, became a symbol of justice and guidance amid chaos. As Israel suffered under the cruel dominance of Canaan, Déborah prepared the way for liberation. But before victory, there was a relentless enemy to be faced. For 20 years, Israel lived under the merciless rule of Jabin, king of Canaan. His army was led by Sisera, a cruel general who terrorized the people with their 900 iron carriages. These war machines symbolized the overwhelming power of the Canaanites, making any resistance impossible. The Israelites were cornered, with no strength to react, living as prisoners in their own land. Every day, oppression became more unbearable. The paths were dangerous, the abandoned villages, and hope seemed to have disappeared. The people, who once trusted God, now lived in fear. But as so many times in Israel's history, when pain became unbearable, a cry for liberation arose. And it was this cry that would prepare the way for an unexpected turnaround. Jabin's oppression was not only military, but also spiritual. Israel had moved away from God, falling into idolatry and forgetting the commandments. With this came the consequence: without divine protection, they became vulnerable to enemies. Suffering was not immediate, but it has grown over the years until the weight of slavery has become unbearable. Only then did they realize that they had to return to the Lord. In despair, the people cried out of liberation. Relief screams were not just requests for help, but signs of repentance and desire for change. God heard these supplications and, as He always did with His people, prepared a liberator. But this time, the answer would not come in the form of a traditional warrior. Would come through the wisdom and unshakable faith of a woman, Déborah. Déborah not only judged civil and religious issues, but also brought hope to a people crushed by oppression. Sitting under a palm tree in Ephraim, she advised Israelites of all tribes, guiding them with discernment and justice. His presence was a reminder that God had not abandoned His people, and that there was still a chance of redemption. His call was not based on physical strength, but on direct connection with the Lord. As a prophetess, Déborah received a clear message from God: it was time for liberation. But this victory would not come effortlessly. It would take courage, strategy, and above all, faith. His role was not only to announce the divine will, but also to ensure that the plan was executed. And for that, she needed a military leader willing to fight. It was time for Barak to go on the scene. Déborah did not hesitate to convey the divine order to Barak. He should gather 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them to Mount Tabor. There they would face the powerful army of Sisera. The message was clear: God had already decreed the victory, but it was necessary to act. For Barak, this mission seemed too bold. How could a group of warriors on foot face a Canaanite army equipped with iron carriages? But God's strategy never follows human logic. The order did not come from a conventional military plan, but from a heavenly guarantee. Barak was facing a choice: trust the divine promise or hesitate in the face of fear. And his answer would show that despite being a brave leader, his faith still needed a push. And this push would come from Deborah's firm words. Even before God's command, Barak hesitated. He knew that Sisera's army was brutal, and his iron carriages seemed invincible. Instead of simply obeying, he imposed one condition: he would only go to battle if Deborah went with him. His faith was still hesitant, and he saw in the presence of the prophetess a guarantee that God would really be with Israel. But this hesitation would be price. Deborah accepted the request, but declared an impactful prophecy: victory would come, but Sisera would not fall through Barak's hands. Instead, God would deliver the enemy into the hands of a woman. This answer showed that although Barak was a brave leader, Israel's true strength was not in him, but in obedience to God. And this prophecy prepared the way for a surprising outcome. With Deborah by her side, Barak gathered the 10,000 warriors and marched to Mount Tabor. On the other hand, Sisera fully trusted the power of his iron carriages, believing that Israel would be crushed. But the battle would not be decided by human force. God intervened unexpectedly. At the crucial moment, a torrential storm fell over the battlefield, turning the ground into a sea of mud. The dreaded iron carriages, once seen as invincible, were trapped in the mud, becoming useless. Israel's warriors, driven by Deborah's leadership and Barak's renewed trust, advanced without fear. Chaos took over the Sisera army, which in despair fled on foot. God had shown once again that no human strength can resist his power. But Sisera's story was not over yet. With his army destroyed and his immobilized carriages in the mud, Sisera saw no choice but escape. He abandoned his men and ran in search of shelter, finding refuge in the tent of Jael, wife of Heber, a Quenu who had good relations with the Canaanites. Thinking she was safe, Sisera trusted Jael, accepted her welcome, and fell in deep sleep, exhausted by the battle. But he didn't know he was entering a deadly trap. Jael, realizing that this was the time to fulfill the prophecy, took a tent cut and, with a single right blow, crossed the head of the enemy general. Thus, the honor of victory was not from Barak, but of a woman, just as Deborah had announced. When Barak arrived in chase, he found Sisera already dead. The fall of the dreaded commander symbolized the end of Canaanite oppression and the beginning of a new era to Israel. After the victory over the Canaanites, Deborah did not let this great deed be forgotten. Inspired by God, she composed a song of celebration, extolling the courage of Israel and divine justice. This song was not just a song, but a powerful account of God's intervention, highlighting Jael's role, Sisera's cowardice, and the importance of obedience to the Lord. His words echoed for generations, teaching that when God fights for his people, victory is certain. Deborah's song was also a call to gratitude and reflection. She recalled that the victory came because some were willing to act, while others omitted each other. Israel had experienced liberation, but the future would depend on its faithfulness to God. The song was not just a hymn of triumph, but a reminder that history could repeat themselves if the people walked away again. And this lesson would become part of Deborah's legacy. Deborah's story remains one of the greatest examples of faith, courage, and leadership in the Bible. In a time when the female figure rarely occupied positions of authority, she proved that God does not choose leaders for the genre, but by the willingness to obey and trust him. His life has shown that true strength is not in the sword or in iron carriages, but in obedience and unshakable faith in the Lord. Deborah not only led a nation to victory, but also inspired generations to trust in divine purpose. His role as a judge and prophetess reinforces that God raises those who are ready to hear and act as his will. His history teaches us that, regardless of circumstances, when we place ourselves in the hands of God, He enables us to fulfill impossible missions. Deborah's story teaches us that true strength comes from faith and obedience to God. She did not need a bright armor or a giant army. Her authority came from the Lord. How many times do we leave fear and doubt prevent us from acting? Just as Barak hesitated, we can also have moments of uncertainty. But the great lesson is that when we trust God and follow His call, He gives us everything we need to win. Now I ask you, what does this story teach you about your own life? Is there any battle you have been postponing for fear or insecurity? Perhaps it is the time to act, to trust, and take the first step. If this story inspired you, be sure to leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss more content like this. And there's one more amazing video waiting for you on the screen right now. Until next time.